New York shone under the lights of the skyscrapers. The city was a stage of intense contrasts. On one side, the unbridled luxury of billionaires flaunting their fortunes in penthouses on Fifth Avenue. On the other, the silent struggle of the workers who made that glamour possible. At the top of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, a breathtaking penthouse dominated the urban landscape. It was the residence of Ethan Whitmore, a real estate mogul known for his exorbitant wealth and relentless arrogance. Among the many employees who kept his personal empire running was Emily Carter, a young housekeeper. To her, that job was not an end, but a means to something greater. What no one knew was that behind the simple uniform and reserved demeanor, Emily hid a grand dream: to graduate in law and build a career that would lift her out of that world of submission. Ethan Whitmore had always believed that money was the only thing that mattered. Born into a billionaire family, he had never had to fight for anything. His real estate empire had grown at the expense of questionable deals, evictions, and predatory acquisitions. At 45 years old, he exuded a cold charm, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits. But his calculating gaze and condescending laugh revealed the true nature of his character. To Ethan, the employees in his house were nothing more than disposable pieces on the chessboard of his power. He rarely remembered their names or recognized their faces. To him, Emily Carter was just another shadow in the landscape of his luxurious life. "Emily, my coffee now," he ordered without even lifting his eyes from his phone. She obeyed, but inside, she refused to be defined by that moment. She knew she wouldn't belong in that place forever. One day she would leave that penthouse not as an employee, but as someone who could stand on equal footing with him. Emily was 27 years old and carried a responsibility far greater than anyone her age should have to bear. Orphaned since her teenage years, she took care of her younger brother Jake, who was 17, ensuring he had better opportunities than she ever did. She worked from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening and attended law school at night. Her best friend, Sophia Reynolds, was the only one who knew her secret. "Emily, you need to slow down. This pace is going to kill you," Sophia warned whenever she saw her exhausted. "I can't stop, Soph. What keeps me going is knowing that one day I'll be on the other side of the table." Even while surrounded by opulence, Emily was invisible to the people who frequented that penthouse. Ethan's guests never noticed her. To them, she was just someone who served champagne or cleaned marble furniture. But her mind was far from there. While polishing silverware, she memorized legal articles. While arranging velvet cushions, she mentally recited case law. One Friday afternoon, as Emily finished organizing the living room, Ethan walked in with an ironic smile. "Emily, I'm throwing a party tomorrow night. I want you to be there." She looked up, surprised. "Sir, you heard me. I want you there, not as an employee, but as a guest. It'll be fun." There was something in the way he spoke that sent a chill down her spine. Something wasn't right. Ethan had never shown any interest in her existence before. Olivia Davenport, Ethan's girlfriend and a famous model, appeared soon after, impeccably dressed with a venomous smile. "Oh, you have to come, darling. It's going to be an unforgettable experience." Emily hesitated. Her instincts screamed that this was a trap, but for some reason she found herself saying, "All right." She had no idea that this decision would change everything. That same night, Ethan and Olivia were sitting on the penthouse's luxurious leather sofa, toasting to what they believed would be a night of fun at Emily's expense. "Did you see her face? She totally fell for it." Olivia laughed, swirling her wine glass. "It's going to be hilarious. We'll make everyone believe she's a special guest and, at the right moment, reveal that she's nothing but a little maid." Ethan smiled in satisfaction. To him, everything was a game, a moment of cruel entertainment to impress his bored elite. What he didn't know was that by the end of that party he would be the one leaving humiliated. That night, as Emily Carter folded the last sheets in the guest room, her stomach churned with anxiety. Ethan Whitmore's invitation echoed in her mind like a disturbing riddle. Since when did he care about having an employee at his parties? She knew something was wrong. Ethan never did anything without a purpose. But what was his move? When she arrived at the small apartment she shared with her brother, she found Jake studying on the couch. The 17-year-old boy was her greatest reason to keep fighting. "You look weird," he remarked, closing his chemistry book. "Ethan invited me to a party tomorrow." "What?" Jake's eyes widened. "That's weird, Em. I know, but refusing would only raise suspicion. And honestly, if he wants to test me, Maybe this is my chance to turn the game around. She didn't know how, but she had a feeling that night would change her life. The next afternoon, Emily left work early, under the disdainful gaze of Martha, the housekeeper. "Are you sure about this, dear? People like us don't belong at these kinds of events," Martha said, her tone half warning, half resignation. Emily didn't reply. She simply took the dress Olivia Davenport had sent to her locker. The slippery, shiny fabric felt like a temporary disguise for a life that had never been hers. As she looked at herself in the mirror in her apartment, already dressed, she felt a knot in her throat. The deep red gown hugged her figure elegantly, and the high heels gave her a commanding posture. For the first time, she saw herself as something beyond a maid, maybe as the lawyer she would one day become. Jake smiled proudly. "You look like a CEO. Ethan has no idea what a mistake he's making." She took a deep breath. Let the game begin. Ethan's penthouse was stunning that night. Crystal chandeliers reflected the golden glow of the room, and waiters moved gracefully, carrying champagne flutes on silver trays. Men in suits and women in designer dresses laughed with raised glasses, engaged in conversations about investments, European vacations, and multi-million-dollar acquisitions. When Emily arrived, there was a brief moment of subtle silence. Eyes turned toward her, some in surprise, others in curiosity. Ethan, standing on the other side of the room, smiled as he saw her. The prey had stepped into the cage. "Welcome, Emily." He appeared by her side, holding a glass. "I hope you're enjoying yourself." She kept her composure. "I just got here, but it seems interesting." Olivia joined them, holding a glass of white wine, her gaze sweeping over Emily from head to toe. "I'm so glad you accepted the invitation. I didn't know you liked this kind of setting." Emily met the model's gaze without flinching. "Well, I'm an observer, and I like to learn." Ethan and Olivia exchanged a quick glance. The maid was more confident than they had expected. The party remained lively, and Ethan led Emily from one group to another, introducing her as if she were someone important. She played along, conversing with businessmen and socialites without ever revealing her true position in the house. But then came the anticipated moment. Ethan raised his glass and called for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast. Tonight we celebrate another year of achievements and successful business ventures, but I also want to recognize someone very special here tonight." He smiled at Emily, and a chill ran down her spine. "Emily Carter," he gestured toward her. "A hard-working, dedicated woman, someone who truly knows this house inside and out. After all, she's my housemaid." Laughter rippled through the room. Olivia covered her mouth, feigning exaggerated surprise. "What? You almost fooled us." Emily felt her face burn. The weight of dozens of mocking gazes bore down on her, but instead of despair, something inside her awakened. "No, you're not going to break me." Before the laughter could spread any further, a voice cut through the silence. "Wait a second." Emily Carter, a man in his 50s, dressed in an impeccable suit with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Dr. Richard Donovan, a renowned New York attorney, observed Emily with interest. "You study at NYU, right? Law school?" The room fell silent. Emily lifted her chin, standing firm. "Yes, sir. I'm in my final year." Dr. Donovan smiled, impressed. "I knew I recognized your name. You wrote an excellent article on real estate litigation recently. It's been making waves in the legal community." The expressions around them shifted from mocking to astonished. Guests began whispering. Ethan paled. "Wait, what?" Dr. Donovan chuckled. "How ironic, isn't it? A future attorney specializing in exactly the kind of practice Ethan engages in, or rather, disregards." Emily seized the moment and stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, do you know what's even more interesting? Over the years I've worked here, I've studied your company's acquisitions closely, and I've noticed something curious. Some of those purchases have legal irregularities, questionable documentation, suspicious transfers." The murmurs grew louder. The guests who had laughed just moments ago now looked at Ethan with distrust. He swallowed hard. "That's ridiculous." Emily smiled, finally savoring her victory. "Maybe, but it won't be long before someone investigates." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Whitmore experienced what it was like to be at the center of humiliation. And the maid he had tried to ridicule? Now, everyone looked at her with respect. When Emily left the party that night, she was no longer just the housemaid of Ethan Whitmore's penthouse. She was a woman on the verge of carving out her own place in the world, the first person to stand against him as an equal. And Ethan? He remained there, surrounded by doubtful and wary eyes, because in this game of power, he had underestimated the wrong person. The sun rose over Manhattan, but for Ethan Whitmore, the city felt darker than ever. His luxurious penthouse, always so vibrant after his parties, was now steeped in an eerie silence. The hangover wasn't from alcohol, but from the crushing blow he had suffered the night before. He had spent years constructing an impeccable image, a billionaire empire builder, surrounded by influential people and sycophants. He had never been questioned, until in front of an audience of magnates and socialites, a simple housemaid, or rather a future attorney, had brutally exposed him. Online news outlets were already picking up the story. Gossip blogs, business columns, and even financial magazines were referencing the incident. Billionaire tries to humiliate employee at luxury party, but ends up disgraced. Rising attorney exposes irregularities in Ethan Whitmore's business at elite event. Who is Emily Carter, the woman who turned the tables on one of New York's most powerful magnates? Ethan slammed his phone onto the table. This was a nightmare. That damn woman. He had underestimated Emily Carter, and now he was paying the price. Emily, on the other hand, felt the winds of change blowing in her favor. The morning after the party, she was summoned to Dr. Richard Donovan's office. The renowned attorney didn't just want to congratulate her, he wanted to hire her. "You have a sharp eye for legal irregularities," he said, offering her a cup of coffee. "And the courage to speak about them, even in front of a powerful man. That's rare." She could hardly believe what she was hearing. An internship at one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. This would be an incredible opportunity for me, Dr. Donovan. For you and for us. We need minds like yours. Emily accepted immediately. She was finally stepping into the world where she belonged. As she walked out of the elegant building where Donovan's firm was located, she looked up at the towering skyscrapers around her and felt something new, power. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small in the vastness of Manhattan. While Emily was rising, Ethan was falling. The accusations raised at the party began to attract attention. Journalists started investigating. Some of his business partners began asking uncomfortable questions. Confidence in Whitmore Enterprises was shaken. He tried to control the damage. He issued press statements claiming everything was baseless speculation, but no one believed him. His lawyers were bombarded with inquiries about the suspicious transactions. And the worst part, investors started pulling away. Olivia Davenport, who had once been his girlfriend and accomplice in all his parties and games, wasted no time in disappearing. He tried calling her but received only a short, cold message. "I don't want to be associated with you right now. It's best if we go our separate ways." Ethan tasted the bitterness of loneliness. For the first time, he wasn't in control. 2 weeks later, Ethan and Emily met again, but this time the roles were reversed. He had been called in for a meeting with the attorneys leading the investigations into his real estate dealings. As he walked into the conference room of one of the most respected law firms in New York, his body tensed at the sight of who was sitting at the table. Emily Carter. She was there, not as a maid, as a legal trainee. Elegantly dressed in a sleek blazer, with impeccable posture, she met his gaze without fear. Unlike what he expected, there was no anger in her eyes, only confidence. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted, with a faint, knowing smile. Ethan felt a mix of humiliation and frustration. How had things come to this? "I see you got what you wanted," he said, trying to mask his tension. "What I wanted?" She clasped her hands together on the table. "No. What I wanted was justice." "And it looks like justice has found you, hasn't it?" He didn't respond, because deep down he knew she was right. The investigation into Ethan intensified in the following months. Some contracts were revoked, deals collapsed, and his reputation never fully recovered. He remained wealthy, but he was never respected the same way again. Emily, on the other hand, kept rising. She graduated with honors and became one of the most promising attorneys in the city. She never again had to clean up anyone's mess, except the legal messes of men like Ethan. And when, years later, they faced each other again in court, Ethan realized that, of all the things he had lost, the most important was his power over others. And Emily? She never had to fear him again, because now the world belonged to her. The courtroom was packed that morning. The entire city seemed to be watching the case, with journalists crowding the hallways, cameras flashing at every important figure who entered. Ethan Whitmore, once one of New York's most influential businessmen, sat at the defense table, his expression weary, wearing a suit that seemed looser than it should, perhaps not in size but in the weight of the defeats he carried on his shoulders. He had never imagined he would end up here. He had always been the predator, never the prey. For years, he had manipulated contracts, bought favors, and ensured his untouchable position at the top of the real estate market. But now, he was surrounded by top-tier lawyers and a stern judge scrutinizing every detail of his suspicious transactions. And, ironically, the woman leading the case against him was Emily Carter, the same Emily he had once tried to humiliate. The difference was that now she wasn't there as an invisible employee in his home, but as a respected attorney, ready to bring him down from the only position he had left. Emily entered the courtroom with steady steps, her heels echoing against the marble floor. Her black blazer gave her an air of impeccable authority. Her gaze was calm, but carried an unwavering firmness. She didn't need words to assert her power. Her presence alone was enough. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as she passed the defense table. Her name had been making headlines for weeks. Former housemaid becomes lawyer and takes billionaire to court after past humiliation. Emily Carter, the rise of the woman who turned the tables on Ethan Whitmore. Poetic justice? Billionaire faces lawsuit led by the woman he tried to ridicule years ago. Ethan watched her, a bitter taste of irony in his mouth. How had this happened? How had he, who once held the world in his hands, ended up facing the very woman he once considered insignificant? Emily showed no exaggerated emotion. There was no arrogance in her expression, no vengeance, only determination. The judge entered and the hearing began. The next few hours were brutal for Ethan. Emily and her team presented detailed evidence, analyzed contracts, exposed fraudulent clauses, and brought forth witnesses who confirmed the irregularities in his business dealings. Every word she spoke was a precise strike, dismantling his defense piece by piece. Faced with irrefutable arguments, Ethan's lawyers struggled to counterattack. They were fighting a force of nature that Ethan himself had created, a brilliant, relentless woman determined to expose the truth. At one point, when Emily presented a key document proving a multi-million-dollar fraud, Ethan felt the room spin. His eyes locked onto her, but this time there was no hatred, only the bitter realization that he had lost. For a fleeting moment, he remembered the night of the party years ago, the cruel laughter that had echoed through the room when he exposed Emily in front of his friends, the satisfaction he had felt watching her blush in embarrassment. Now, the laughter was gone, and he was the one whose face burned with shame. As the hearing concluded, the judge reviewed the documents and delivered his final words. Based on the evidence presented, this court rules that the case against Mr. Ethan Whitmore will proceed to a formal trial on charges of fraud and financial mismanagement. The impact of the decision hit like a bomb. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Journalists typed frantically. Lawyers whispered among themselves. Ethan's stomach churned. The worst was yet to come. As the judge exited, Emily gathered her files and prepared to leave, not even sparing Ethan a glance. But before she could step out, she heard his hesitant voice. Emily. She stopped, but she didn't turn around immediately. A tense silence filled the room. The man who had once laughed at her now seemed smaller, more fragile, like a castle crumbling after years of standing against the wind. Finally, Emily looked at him. Her eyes held no resentment. There was no need. She had already won. You got what you wanted. Ethan sighed, his voice drained. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile curving her lips. You still don't get it, do you? She said calmly. I never wanted revenge, Ethan. What I wanted was justice, and justice has finally found you. Without another word, she turned and walked away. In the months that followed, Ethan Whitmore's name remained in the news. The trial moved forward, and his once unshakable reputation crumbled completely. Investors abandoned him, his businesses collapsed, and he became a forgotten man cast into the shadows of the city he once ruled. And Emily Carter, her name became a symbol of resilience and justice. She continued rising in her career, becoming one of the most respected attorneys in the country. Her past as a housemaid was no longer a burden, but a story of triumph. One day, as she reviewed a new case in her office, she received an email from a young law student. Doctor, Carter, your story inspires me. I come from a humble background and want to fight for what's right, just like you did. How do I start? Emily smiled. She had turned the tables, and now it was her turn to help others do the same.